Ivan Antonovich Efremov. Meeting above Tuscarora, Part 1. Many years ago I sailed as senior mate of the captain a rather large steamer Comintern, 5,000 tons, good English construction. We sailed between Vladivostok and Kamchatka, and occasionally southwards to Shanghai, or closer to Shenzhen and Hakodate. In July 1926, we were on a regular voyage to Petropavlovsk, with a call in Hakodate, hence through the Tsugar Strait. We left Hakodate in the evening, and a day later there came a furious storm, a real typhoon from the Zuid west. The excitement was so great that when we passed the traverse of Nemuro, the waves began to cover the ship. We had valuable cargo on deck, and besides, various fragile machines in the hold. Our captain Begunov, a very nice though stern old man, after a short conference with me on the bridge, decided to turn full backstroke, almost to the foredeck. The vessel at once stopped taking on water, and in spite of the infernal wave, went more calmly. I had to lay a new course instead of the usual one. I left the island of Sikhotan to the north and went to the east of the Kuril Islands. The storm pounded us all night, and only the next morning it began to subside. But the wind was very fresh till the evening. By night it quieted down completely, and I went to bed early, as I was tired for the last 24 hours desperately. The night was quite unusual in these parts. No wind, complete calm, clear and moonless. I slept very soundly, but, as is my habit, I awoke to the clinking of bottles. Though I had not counted the blows, I knew that my watch was half an hour away. And, indeed, almost immediately the sculleryman appeared with a huge mug of hot cocoa. This is a habit I can advise everyone, to drink hot cocoa before watch. Then the cold and damp are not terrible, and you will not feel sleepy at once. I jumped up, dressed quickly, drank the cocoa, and, smoking a pipe, stretched out on the bunk. Again. How good these 10 or 15 minutes before going out on night watch in the cold, gloom, dampness, and fog. Taking a drag of fragrant, strong tobacco, I listened to the irregular splash of the waves and the clear work of the machine. Its powerful noise and the slight shaking of the whole huge hull of the ship had a soothing effect, like a quiet musical melody. The cabin was warm, and the bright light of the lamp fell on a table with an interesting book lying on it, a pleasure I had anticipated after my watch. I looked round my cabin, a tiny mansion 20 feet above the terrible green depths of the Pacific, with pleasure. And I thought that I had been attracted to the seaman's profession chiefly because it gave me much time for the kind of reflection to which I had always been inclined. My thoughts were interrupted by a knock at the door. The door swung open, and the massive figure of the captain appeared on the threshold. "Why are you wandering about so early, Semyon Mitrofanovich?" I asked, sitting down and turning the heavy chair towards him. It must not have dawned yet. How could it not be dawn? Soon you can switch off the lights. Oh, what rare weather! It's the only time to sleep in weather like this, I said. Well, of course, I'm a sufferer. I've got a watch to keep. But what about you? Oh, young people, all you want to do is to laze about, replied the captain good-naturedly. But I, an old man, don't need much sleep. I've already gone round. The deck counted the losses from the storm. By the way, Yevgeny Nikolaevich, you should check your orthodromy in the afternoon so that it's not only by calculation, he added, while I was wrapping a scarf round my neck and pulling on my coat. Certainly, Semyon Mitrofanovich. We have a new route, I answered the captain, and lit a match, smoking a pipe. A sharp jolt followed by a thud shook the hull of the ship. Almost simultaneously there was a rumble somewhere aft, and the noise of the machine was interrupted. For a few seconds the captain and I looked at each other in silence, listening. Then the machine resumed its work, and again the same rumbling noise was replaced by silence. The burning match, which I continued to hold in my hand, burnt my finger, and I, ahead of the captain, rushed out of the cabin. All those who have sailed a lot will understand my feelings at those moments, knowing with what involuntary fear is perceived the stopping of the machine in the open sea. The powerful heart of the ship with its beating gives it life and strength to fight against the elements. But now it has stopped, and the ship is dead. Now it is the toy of the unfaithful. Ocean! Turning to the gangway, I slipped, and just then I noticed that the ship was tilted to the left side. At that moment the captain caught up with me. His breathing was intermittent, but the old man, gray-haired at sea, did not say a word. The deck was dark. The barely visible dawn marked only the general outline of the ship. The door of the navigator's cabin was open, and a streak of light fell from it. From the bridge came the anxious voice of the third mate. "Trouble, Semyon Mitrofanovich. We have struck a reef. The propeller seems to be broken. The rudder is jammed." The captain shouted angrily, "What the hell is a reef? This is the deepest part of the ocean." Of course, the Tuscarora trench, I realized, calming down a little. The captain went up to the bridge. My place was on deck. "Bosun, watchman upstairs. Prepare the lot," I ordered. Straining my eyesight, I saw the captain leaning over the intercom. Talking to the mechanic, I thought. Faintly, the telegraph rang out. Again I heard the rumbling under the stern. The ringing of the telegraph coincided with the cessation of the machine's work. "Yevgeny Nikolaevich, let's take the starboard lot," came the captain's voice. I gave the command. The bosun responded from the darkness. "No bottom." Closer. "To the bow at the crumball," commanded the captain. "2 marks and 2, replied the bosun. 14 feet? What the devil!" they exclaimed. The depth was 12 to 18 feet on the port side, and 20 feet astern. It was dawning. I leaned over the side, trying to see something in the dark water splashing below. There was that heavy and slow breathing of the sea, which is called a dead ripple. I perceived with surprise the measured rocking of the steamer on a large and long wave. This rocking was not accompanied by a thump, which would have been inevitable when landing on a reef. The captain called me to the bridge. He leaned over the railing and stared hard at the waves off the port side. The searchlight flashed. The gray haze of dawn twilight moved further away from the ship. I noticed that under the port side of the ship the waves were smaller than all around, short and flat. "Yevgeny Nikolaevich, give me the ship's place in the numbering as soon as possible." "Yes, Semyon Mitrofanovich," I answered, and went to the navigator's cabin. "Launch the dinghy." I heard the captain's voice. "Petya," that was the name of the third mate, "you and the lot into the dinghy." My respect for the captain, who had ascertained the accident without unnecessary fuss, increased still more. "Well done, old chap," thought I, putting the protractors on the chart, and I heard the captain's footsteps behind me. "Well?" he asked calmly, barely glancing at the chart, where the chiseled point lay far away from the Kuril Islands, above the terrible depths of the Tuscarora. A sudden conjecture flashed through my brain. I even felt ashamed of my lack of imagination. "I think I understand, Semyon Mitrofanovich," I said. "Understood what?" "We've hit a wreck." "That's so," confirmed the captain. "The chances are 1 in a million, but we were lucky, I can't say." "Well, how are the measurements?" We went to the bridge. The dinghy was already docked on the port side. As we expected, there was no bottom even a short distance from the ship. It was a clear morning. The auditor and bosun returned from the holds, and reported that there was no leak. At that time, the chief of the diving rescue party, which we were carrying to unshoal the Japanese ship Amerikamaru, an experienced marine engineer, came up to us. He walked round the ship, then went up to the bridge. "Shall we begin, Commander?" asked the engineer. "All right, let's hurry up," agreed the captain. "We took you to rescue a Japanese, and we found ourselves in the rescued. 2 divers, as wide as chests of drawers, apparently people of great strength, began to collect. I had made several short dives myself, but I had never seen divers working in the open sea, and I watched them with interest. The approximate width of the sunken vessel was established by measurements on the dinghy. A shot was secured on the port side, from which a narrow gangway was dropped. The diver armed himself with a long pole and began to descend directly into the waves, occasionally resting the pole against the side of the steamer and swinging on the gangway. Suddenly he lowered the ladder and immediately disappeared under the water, leaving thousands of air bubbles on the surface. The chief of the diving party stood on board by the telephone. He waved his hand to the captain and me, beckoning us to come to him. It seemed to me that in the rays of the sun that had risen above the horizon, some dark mass was vaguely outlined beneath the ship. "Go back," the engineer shouted into the phone. "Yes." "Well, crawl through? And then?" "Good." "What's good?" The captain couldn't resist. The engineer didn't answer anything. Many minutes of tense waiting passed, as it seemed to me. The membranes of the telephone hummed from time to time. "Try to get into the aft room or the hold," said the engineer, and handed the phone to the second diver. "Well, Commander," he said, turning to the captain, "what a miracle! Some shipwreck was coming towards us under water. We ran headlong into it. Our Comintern, as it turns out, is characterized by very sharp contours. It entered the hull of the wreck like an axe into a log and apparently got stuck. The sunken ship is a very old wooden large sailing ship. The masts are broken off, of course. The bowstern of the Comintern sits in the stern of the sailing ship, and the propeller and rudder are just above the wreck of the bowsprit. They are, thank God, intact. When they tried to turn the machine, the propeller hit the bowsprit. The strength of this old sailing ship is a marvelous thing. We've got 2,200 forces, and we're not moving. Explain to me, comrade." "Engineer," asked the captain, "how could the sunken ship float for so long, and even under water, in the manner of a submarine?" "Very simple. The ship is wooden, and probably its cargo is light. I sent a diver into the hold to see what's in there. And it was you who drove it under the water with your steamer. It must have stuck out a little above the water." "Yes, of course, let him come up." The engineer interrupted his explanations, addressing the diver at the telephone. The crew and the captain and I looked at the diver as if he were a messenger from an unknown country. This man bravely lowered himself into the water in the middle of the ocean and walked deep under the steamer on the lost ship, which had been in the sea for many years. The cheerful, slightly mischievous eyes of the diver, who had taken off his spacesuit, gave no indication of the fatigue he must surely be feeling. At the meeting in the navigator's cabin, the diver drew a rough hull of the sunken ship, which surprised us with its ancient outlines. Knowing that I had always been interested in naval history and especially in sailing ships, the captain asked me if I could determine the class and age of the vessel. From the rough outline sketched by the diver, of course, it was very difficult to decide anything. At any rate, it was a 3-masted ship of very large size, with a broad hull and a raised stern. I decided that it was at least 100 years old since it was built. The diver reported that the hull of the ship was constructed of very dense wood. The hold appeared to be stuffed to the top with lightweight plates of cork. After a little thought, the engineer decided to try to undermine the starboard side of the sailing ship so that the floating cargo fell out. Then the heavy, water-soaked wooden hull of the ship will go down by its own weight, and we will be free. "Well, let's free her, for heaven's sake," exclaimed the captain. The engineer thought again. "What other difficulties?" the captain asked anxiously. "The fact is that 2 men are needed for the job. It will be quicker and, above all, safer. If we can't get through the hole to the board, we'll have to chisel outside, and it's very hard to cope with the current. It's lucky it's so unusually quiet, or it would be very bad." "But you have 2 divers," I said. "There are 2 divers, but one of them should be at the top, at the pump, because some of our specialists left on the Lozovsky. So I'm thinking how to be—" Here I remembered my small diving experience and thought, what if I go down? Of course, it was a bit scary to go down in the open sea, but I was sure that I would be useful as an auxiliary force. I offered the engineer my services as a second diver, and in response to his incredulous smile, I told him about my capabilities. "Well, let the diver decide whether he wants you as an assistant or not," said the engineer. The diver looked me over with an appraising eye and asked me a few questions about working in a spacesuit. My answers seemed to satisfy him, and he agreed to have me as an assistant, warning me that if I was properly banged up against the hull, to take offense only at myself. I listened attentively to all the instructions, thinking at the same time that if I bang against the hull, I would hardly remember the advice of the diver. The crew treated my dive with friendly and cheerful enthusiasm, and while they were dressing me in a spacesuit, I had time to listen to a lot of sharp words, which sailors are masters of. At last all the preparations were finished. Putting on the helmet somehow at once separated me from the familiar world. The diver had already disappeared under the ship when I, not moving my pudgy legs with much dexterity, began to descend the gangway. All my attention was absorbed by the dark green surface of the water beneath me. I had to simultaneously press the back of my head against the exhaust valve, suck in more air, and duck under the wave as it recoiled backwards. I successfully did this, and in a few seconds a thick gloom enveloped the helmet window. The water was really hitting me hard on my left side, and it was only by exerting all my strength that I held on to something slanting upwards on my right, and was able to look round. The sun shining brightly over the sea gave ample light. Pabord. First I recognized only the general outline of the sunken ship, crossed by the slanting black shadow falling from the side of the Comintern. Then I saw a square ledge, the remnant of some deck building, and behind it a thick stump, as I realized later, the splinter of a mast, with a diver leaning against it. I immediately reached him and followed him to the side of the sailing ship. It was a difficult descent down the slippery, sloping surface, covered with seaweed, shells, and slime. But the water, pressing towards us, supported us well. As we had agreed while still aloft, we decided to enter the hold through the broken stern room. The side of the wreck was marked by a clear line, beyond which the reflection of the faint light from above ceased. Further, there was darkness, a precipice into a monstrous abyss of absolutely black water, and I inwardly shuddered, imagining that the ship's side hung over the 8-kilometer depth. Along with the rippling waves, spots of sunlight ran along the deck of the sunken vessel. Following the dim and greenish glare of the sun, I tried to recreate the appearance of the ship. My memory, trained on the outlines of old sailing ships, helped me to do this. Through the thickness of overgrown shells and wriggling tails of seaweed, I guessed, rather than saw, a 3-masted ship with a broad hull of very massive construction. The low and blunt bow and high stern, spoke of the 18th century. By the very thick fragment of the bowsprit, we could guess its considerable length, which was also typical for ships of the 16th century. In general, the hull was remarkably well preserved. Even the bilge hatch cover was in place. A little ahead of the mainmast there was a large dent. The deck, which had been pressed down by the keel of our vessel, had sagged, the carlins were warped, and broken bims were sticking out, giving this part of the vessel a look of grim destruction, heightened by the deep blackness that reigned in the breaches and crevices. I stood bewildered before the chaos of broken beams and planks, but my companion switched on a strong electric lantern and turned immediately to the left. Here indeed, as I had theoretically surmised, was the blackened right-hand corridor of the Utah, which had survived the destruction of the ship collision. I switched on my lantern too, and shoulder to shoulder with the diver we entered the thick darkness, gingerly fumbling with our feet on the deck planks. To our right there was a slightly gray light coming through what I guessed to be the rear, aft windows, or rather what was left of them. Doubtless the hatches and hold, if there were any, were left behind us, probably somewhat to our right, and we passed them, penetrating deep into the stern. Prompted by burning curiosity, I quickly realized that the light must pass through the wardroom, and opposite to it by custom must be the captain's cabin. On the wall to my right, where a slightly visible gray spot of light was now rippling, must be the entrance to the cabin, which perhaps holds the secret of this ship. I moved resolutely to the right, the reddish in the water light of the electric torch glided along the black-brown wall with no sign of any openings. I placed my rubber-gloved hand on the wall, and, guiding it along the oozy boards, soon fumbled for the rib of the doorframe. Apparently the door is here, I guessed, and started pushing the wall with my shoulder, but it wouldn't budge. I struck the wall with the crowbar, which on the fourth blow pierced the wood and almost slipped out of my hands into the void, or rather into the water behind the door. I was pressing the door again and again when the light of the diver's lantern blurred behind me. He brought his helmet close to mine, and I saw in the semi-darkness his surprised and worried face. I pointed to the door. He nodded in agreement. At the same time, the engineer's voice came to my consciousness, insistently repeating, "Comrade XO, what's the matter with you? Why don't you answer?" I briefly said that I had got into the aft room. Everything was all right. Now we would get into the hold. The voice in the telephone quietly fell silent, and I again turned all my thoughts to the door to the captain's cabin. That it was the captain's cabin behind that door, I was unaccountably and absolutely certain. The diver ran his hand along the edge of the door recess and thrust his crowbar between the door and the doorframe. Damn it! The door must be opening. Outwards, it dawned on me, and I joined my efforts to the diver's bear-like strength. Not 2 minutes later, we were standing in the impenetrable darkness of the room that had once served the captain. Our lanterns did not give much light. The room was large, and I never could have imagined the exact shape of the captain's quarters. The floor beneath us was flat and slippery. Some pieces of wood, must have been remnants of furniture, kept coming across us. The toe of my heavy boot bumped against something. The light of the lantern brought out of the darkness the corner of a square box lying on its side against the left wall of the cabin. "Aha!" I shouted excitedly. Immediately the engineer's voice emerged from another world. "Aha, what?" "Nothing. It's all right," I answered hastily, and bent down to pick up the box. It was not heavy, but it was very difficult for me already, burdened with tools and tired from the unusual work, to carry this additional burden. The diver, meanwhile, went round the cabin to the right side and found 2 small boxes, which he also carried under his arm. He nodded satisfactorily when he saw my find. Finding nothing else of note in the cabin, we proceeded to the debriefing. After talking through the overhead telephones, that is, through the ship, we took our finds out on deck and put them in a secluded place. Then we went back to the corridor and somehow found a passage to the hold very quickly. I shall hardly be able to tell about the rest in any coherent detail. It was hard work in the endless blackness of narrow, cluttered passages. At last, the diver and I accomplished our task and laid several charges on a section of the bottom and starboard side of the vessel. When all was over and the wire connections were checked, I felt completely exhausted and leaned exhausted against a massive pillar somewhere in the hold near the stern. The diver understood my condition and gave me some breathing space. Climbing up to the deck again, which was not an easy task at all, I rejoiced at the dim glimmer of sunlight and looked round for the last time at the extraordinary picture of the deck of the sunken ship, the right cheekbone of the ship sharply outlined, in the murky light, and the protruding fragment of the bowsprit.